I emergency launched our crew back to Earth and stayed alone on a planet nobody understands. I'm sure that the real threat was inside the ship. My crew wanted to label it safe. I knew safe was the trap. If I returned with them, Earth would have learned the wrong lesson and it would have begged for more. I stayed behind to break the chain before the upgrade reached Earth.
We arrived too early. That's not the official phrasing, of course. In the reports, it will read Primary Reconnaissance Expedition, K7 class planet, conditionally habitable. But I understood it immediately. Inside, we had outrun our own understanding. The planet wasn't ready for our presence, and we weren't ready for its response. I'm a biologist, not because I love life the way romantics do, but because systems have always been easier for me than people. Cells are honest. They don't pretend to know more than they do. They either function or they don't. The planet looked simple, almost insultingly simple. The flora was motionless, with no visible defensive mechanisms. No aggression, no traps, no chemistry capable of burning through a suit or mucous membranes. Too clean, too precise, like a laboratory that hadn't been used yet. I remember the commander saying,
"If there's life here, it doesn't know how to resist."
I didn't respond. I didn't like the word resist. It assumes that we are a threat. But what if we aren't? What if we're simply the next step? I remembered how we were selected, not for skills. Skills can always be compensated by protocol. We were selected for reactions, for how we tolerate uncertainty, for how quickly we feel the urge to put a period at the end of a sentence, and how easily we agree to live in a colon instead. In training, they called it cohesion. In psychological terms, a low divergence index. In human terms, the ability not to interfere with each other's sameness. I passed that selection perfectly, too perfectly. I like to think that meant I was reliable. But in space, reliability often means something else. You know how to shut yourself down in time. You know how to switch off what's unnecessary. You don't ask questions that won't help the landing or speed up data collection. The planet was sterile, and it irritated me almost physically. I caught myself looking for dirt, not literally, but as a sign of natural life. On Earth, life always leaves traces of decay, messiness, pointless energy loss. Here, nothing was wasted, nothing rotted, nothing argued with anything else. At first, I took it as a sign of poverty, then as a sign of hidden structure, and still the feeling remained, something here was too good to be natural. I watched Kane and thought he was satisfied. People like him love worlds that don't argue back. He was a commander not because he could shout, but because he could refrain from shouting and make everyone else do the same. His authority rested on calm, and calm rested on the ability to label anything unclear as dangerous or useless and move it out of the way. When he said resist, I didn't hear it as a comment about the planet. I heard it as a comment about us, about how, deep down, we hope the world will behave like an enemy, because then everything becomes simpler. There's a target, there's a protocol, there are actions. But what if the world isn't an enemy? What if it doesn't assume war at all? Then we're left with the most uncomfortable thing of all, the necessity to understand. And that is always a risk. I worked for a long time. I took samples from leaves, from surfaces, from the internal fibers of the plants. I worked methodically, almost mechanically. Gloves, containers, labels, protocols. We always believe that protocols protect us, not from the world, but from mistakes. That's a lie. They only protect us from realizing our mistakes. I returned to the module later than the others. I removed my helmet, secured it in its holder,
and kept my gloves on. According to protocol, after an external operation, you're not allowed to touch anything except designated surfaces until decontamination is complete. I intended to do it immediately, but fatigue dulls sequence. Not sharply, it simply blurs the boundary between now and in a minute. Laura, the lab technician, approached me. She held a sandwich carefully, almost demonstratively, the way you hold something you're not allowed to drop.
You haven't eaten. Eat. I'll hold it.
I was about to refuse, not out of principle, but out of inertia. But she was already standing too close. Laura knew my obsession with rules. She knew how I reacted to protocol violations, even the smallest ones.
I made the sauce myself. By the standard, it's safe.
She smiled, quickly, almost apologetically, and without giving me time to respond, brought the sandwich directly to my lips, as if the possibility of objection had already been removed. I leaned forward and took a bite. I didn't feel it immediately, only a fraction of a second later, the way you don't feel pain, but a loss of symmetry. I wiped my face automatically, without looking, without stopping. The glove touched my skin. There were microscopic traces of samples on it, extracts, fibers, remnants of cuts. The amount was so insignificant that under any other circumstances, no instrument would have detected it. Laura lowered her hand and stepped back. I straightened up, thanked her, and moved on, already mentally returning to my work. No one paused. No one marked the moment. No one violated protocol, formally. Sometimes irreversible processes begin exactly like this, when everything is done correctly, but slightly earlier than it should have been. The first few hours, nothing happened. The first day, nothing either. On the second day, I noticed the fatigue was gone. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It simply disappeared, like background noise you get used to, and then suddenly realize is no longer there. I attributed it to adaptation, to the new schedule, to the clean atmosphere. On the third day, I slept 4 hours and woke up completely clear. Too clear. I felt my body differently, not as a collection of sensations, but as a coordinated system. My heart worked more evenly, my breathing became deeper but slower. My thoughts, not faster, but more precise. It didn't scare me immediately. The scientist in me was pleased. Blood tests showed deviations. Not critical, not even alarming, just strange.
Are you sure the instruments are calibrated?
I checked 3 times. The values didn't exceed acceptable limits. They looked perfect, too perfect. The immune system showed no activity, no inflammation, no response, as if there were no reason.
Maybe you're just in better shape than you think.
I smiled. It was a socially acceptable response. By the 4th day, I began to feel internal movement. Not pain, not pressure, more like restructuring, as if organs were slowly shifting, adjusting themselves into a more efficient configuration. I caught myself listening to my own body the way I used to listen to instrument readouts. It was no longer simply mine, and there was no horror in that. There was logic. I returned to the plants, deeper, more carefully. I began to see patterns, not biological ones, but systemic. The plants didn't live in the conventional sense. They didn't fight for survival. They were waiting for interaction. Their chemistry didn't destroy, it complemented. Their structures didn't invade, they integrated, reinforcing whatever they came into contact with. I understood it suddenly, the way you understand something obvious that you've been ignoring for too long. This wasn't a parasite, not a symbiont, not a predator. It was improvement, a catalyst. When I tried to explain this to the team, they heard only one word: change. For humans, that always sounds like a threat.
You can't claim that this is safe.
I'm not claiming that it's safe. I'm saying it's not dangerous in the way you're used to. They looked at me the way people look at someone who no longer fits within the norm. And for the first time, I thought, what's frightening isn't what the planet is doing to us. What's frightening is what we're willing to do to it and to ourselves in order not to change. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't want to. I lay there and listened to a body that functioned flawlessly. I thought about how evolution always looks like a catastrophe to those who don't survive it. How every dominant form of life once appeared to be a mistake. And how humans are the only species afraid to become better when better doesn't match their self-image. I knew there would be a conflict next, and I knew it wouldn't be between me and the team. It would be between humanity and the next step. The first thing to change was the attitude. Not the metrics, not the data, the people. Commander Richard Kane began to hold my gaze less often. Not demonstratively, more like the way you look away from a screen when a line appears that doesn't fit the calculation. The medic, Dr. Emmy Harper, started asking questions that no longer carried curiosity, only boundary clarification. Security officer Michael Ross was nearby too often for it to be coincidence. No one said the word infection. No one said threat. Those words were too direct. What was happening was too undefined. I continued submitting tests, blood, tissue, neural activity. The results were logged, compared, fed into datasets. The instruments functioned perfectly. There were no errors. That was precisely what began to irritate them.
Are you sure you haven't taken any stimulants?
I'm sure.
Changes in sleep patterns?
No.
Diet?
The same as everyone else. She marked something on her tablet without comment. I could see how badly she wanted to ask a question that didn't belong to the protocol. She didn't. I felt my body differently, but I couldn't describe it precisely. Not as pain, not as euphoria, more like the removal of excess. Movements became more economical, thoughts shorter. I stopped noticing the internal noise I had previously considered normal. I didn't become better, I became more precise. There was no clear cause. I cycled through explanations: adaptation, microflora, psychosomatics, environmental effects. None of them fit completely. They were all too coarse for what was happening. One element was missing. I didn't yet know which. I caught myself developing a strange habit, listening to my own decisions. I used to think a decision was a result. Now I felt it as a process moving through the body, as if a thought was born first in muscles, in breath, in heart rhythm, and only then rose into the head and acquired words. This wasn't intuition. Intuition is noisy and often wrong. This was different. Thoughts became concise, without unnecessary branches. I didn't choose between options. I saw which one was redundant. It should have been comforting. But comfort is also an emotion, and emotions imply a separation between me and what happens. That boundary was becoming less rigid, and I couldn't decide whether to call it improvement or loss.
There's no immune response. That doesn't happen.
It does if there's nothing for the immune system to fight. I heard my own voice, calm, even, almost colorless. I didn't intend to sound that way, but I did. That was what I noticed in Emmy's reaction. It wasn't the content that unsettled her, but the tone. The tone of someone who doesn't doubt. Doubt is socially safe. It says, we're in this together. We don't know what's happening, so we'll be careful. My certainty sounded like isolation. I tried to return to the familiar, softened my speech, added qualifiers, maybe. It looked like imitation, and I realized, for the first time in my life, I couldn't play normal, because normality requires internal noise. and the noise was gone. A thought appeared inside, cold, strange, foreign. If I can't pretend to be normal, they'll be forced to label me abnormal. It wasn't fear, more like calculation. I had never considered that my own organism could turn me into a political problem. But there it was. Politics began with numbers on a screen that looked too beautiful to be left unexplained.
At the general briefing, Kane talked about timelines, about risks, about the need to accelerate data collection. I listened and understood that we were talking about different things.
The planet is stable, but too neutral. That's concerning.
Neutrality isn't the same as a threat. He looked at me carefully, too carefully.
You've started using evaluative language more often. You used to rely only on data.
Data doesn't always keep up with the process. The room grew quieter. That was the first point of divergence. Not yet a conflict, but a direction. After the informal meeting, I stopped feeling like part of the team, not because they excluded me. Externally, everything remained correct. Greetings, brief task-related exchanges, neutral expressions. They were too well-mannered to express rejection directly. That was precisely why the rejection felt stronger. When a system refuses to acknowledge conflict, the conflict moves into the background and begins to dictate decisions invisibly. It becomes the air. I caught myself hearing their speech like music, not the words, the rhythm, pauses of identical length, identical sentence structures, a drive toward consensus that doesn't look like effort. It looks like an agreement reached in advance. When Ross said, "We need to minimize uncertainty," he wasn't looking at me. He was looking into space. But that space was my position. He spoke as if uncertainty were a piece of furniture that could simply be rearranged. And suddenly, I understood. Psychological selection had created a collective capable of preserving its shape even in the unknown. But the unknown doesn't disappear when shape is preserved. It simply stops being discussed. And then someone has to become its carrier, its name, its container. That someone was becoming me. A form of irritation arose inside, not emotional, but structural. The kind an organism feels when it's forced into a rhythm that doesn't match its own. It didn't demand shouting, it demanded clarity. I told myself, stay calm, give them words they can accept. At the same time, I realized their language was closed. It allowed only what could be labeled procedure, risk, or control. Everything else automatically became interpretation and therefore suspicious. I tried mentally selecting formulations, and the more precisely I chose them, the clearer it became. They wouldn't reject my arguments, they would reject the fact that the arguments were coming from me. This wasn't a dispute about who was right, it was a dispute about access to normality. For the first time, I felt something simple and clear. The team didn't want to understand. The team wanted to return to a state where understanding wasn't required. That was when I first thought about Earth, about how quickly any deviation on Earth is turned into a category, a diagnosis, a memorandum, a rule, a moral position. Humans don't know how to leave things unexplained. They always turn them into a sign: dangerous, safe, permitted, forbidden. If they return with this condition, this leveling, the world will call it optimization, then standard, then requirement. And then choice will disappear. And choice is the only thing that makes a person human. They isolated me unofficially. No orders, no warning tape. I was simply no longer assigned to external operations. Ross began accidentally standing watch near the module where I worked. Conversation stopped when I entered. It was done carefully, humanely. That's how you isolate not a threat, but an inconvenience. Laura came in the evening. She sat across from me without turning the lights on fully. In the half shadow, her face looked tired, but not afraid.
They don't understand what's happening to you,
Neither do I. That was true.
but you act like it doesn't worry you.
Their reaction worries me, not the changes. She was silent for a long time.
Are you sure this is connected to the planet?
I'm not sure. I'm only sure that it doesn't look like a malfunction. By the 6th day, I began noticing the environment responding. Not visually, not directly, more like a statistical anomaly. The plants I worked with showed altered chemical profiles after contact. Not degradation, not a defensive reaction. Correction, as if the system was adjusting itself. I didn't draw conclusions. I recorded. Conclusions were too dangerous. That was when a thought first occurred to me, one I tried to dismiss. What if the cause isn't external? What if the entry point is inside? I went through everything in my memory. Exits, contacts, procedures. Everything was clean. Almost. Almost is a bad word in biology. But the idea hadn't taken shape yet. It remained in the background, without form. I postponed it the way you postpone opening a file that won't load. The team began talking about risks, about unpredictability, about the need for caution. The words grew harsher, even as the phrasing remained soft. I watched fear search for a language, and I understood. When it finds one, it will be too late. I still didn't know exactly what was happening to me, but I was already beginning to understand something else. If a human can't explain improvement, they classify it as a threat. And that knowledge was heavier than any symptom. We gathered in the main module without a formal reason. There was no briefing announced, no agenda. Kane simply said it would be better if everyone was present. Phrasings like that don't allow refusal. They create the sense that refusal has already been accounted for. I noticed the arrangement immediately. Richard Kane sat in the center, as always. Emmy was slightly to the side, with a tablet in her hands, though the screen was dark. Ross stood near the wall without leaning, as if his presence was meant to remain an option. Laura sat across from me, not beside me. The distance was calibrated, almost imperceptibly. I understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was an adjustment. Kane spoke first. His voice was calm, almost friendly.
We all went through the same selection process. We're here because we know how to work as a team, coordinate decisions, trust procedures.
No one nodded. That wasn't necessary. A nod would have meant an individual reaction. Synchrony was valued here.
Sometimes a system begins to produce deviations, not failures, just divergences. And our task isn't to look for someone to blame, but to restore coherence.
The word coherence landed like a key. I felt that they weren't looking at me directly, but through me, like through a variable that had drifted outside acceptable limits.
You've always been the most disciplined among us. That's why we trusted you with complex tasks.
The past tense in his sentence cut sharply.
And that's exactly why we want to understand what has changed in your approach, not physiologically, mentally.
She said the word carefully, as if testing whether it would provoke resistance. I paused before answering. I don't feel a change in my approach. I feel that I'm seeing more connections. It was an honest formulation, and judging by their reaction, an unsuccessful one.
Seeing more doesn't always mean seeing better.
He wasn't looking at me. He was looking into the space between us. That's how things are said when they're not meant for a specific person.
We were selected for psychological compatibility. You know that better than most. Stability, predictability, the ability to act within a shared decision.
I knew. I had been part of that selection. And that was exactly why something else alarmed me. I suddenly felt it clearly. They were thinking the same way.
not in opinions, in structure. Their reactions matched in rhythm. The pauses between statements were identical. Even their breathing synchronized when someone spoke. This wasn't a conspiracy, it was the result of selection. And I understood that I no longer matched that rhythm.
You've started drawing conclusions earlier than the rest of us. That creates tension.
Tension for whom? The question hung in the air.
For the process.
That was the collective speaking, not a person. I looked at them and for the first time clearly recognized the difference. They were trying to preserve form. I had begun to see direction. And those two things rarely coincide.
We're not saying you're wrong. We're saying you're deviating.
The word deviating sounded almost gentle, almost caring.
And our task is to restore balance for all of us.
I understood then that no arguments were expected here. What was expected was correction, not of me, but of my thinking. When the meeting ended, no one stood up abruptly. No one slammed the door. Everything was done so that no trace of conflict would remain. But inside me, it was already clear. This wasn't a team. It was a system designed to preserve the norm. And if the norm doesn't include development, it eventually begins to destroy everything that falls outside its boundaries. I still didn't know what exactly was happening to me, but I already knew that thinking differently meant staying alone. And to my own surprise, that thought no longer frightened me. I spent too long searching for a threat where none existed. The planet's sterility irritated me from the very beginning. No decay, no competition, no chaos. Everything looked as if life had stopped at the preparation stage, like a stage before the performance begins. Now I understood. It hadn't stopped. It had synchronized. The planet's fauna was primitive, not because it failed to evolve, but because it didn't need to evolve separately. The atmosphere performed functions that on Earth are distributed among organisms. The flora performed others. No system closed in on itself. There was no redundancy, no struggle for resources, no need for individual autonomy. Life existed as a connected structure, not as a collection of separate bodies. The human organism turned out to be the problem, not because of weakness, because of completeness. We are closed systems. We're used to functioning independently. Everything we need is inside us: immunity, regulation, recovery, all autonomous. That was why the atmosphere acted on us uniformly. It couldn't integrate, only level, remove deviations, smooth differences, reduce everything to a stable, safe minimum. What the team perceived as normalization was in fact impoverishment. I understood why the changes in me followed a different path. The planet's flora wasn't a source of substance, it was an interface. It allowed the organism not just to adapt, but to interact with other systems, with the atmosphere, the microenvironment, energy flows. Without it, a human remained a closed circuit. With it, became part of a network. I tried to explain this to Emmy, not as a theory, as a necessity. The atmosphere affects everyone, but it doesn't complete the process. It only prepares.
For what?
For interaction, but we can't interact directly. We're too autonomous. She looked at me carefully, but now with caution.
Are you proposing intervention?
I'm proposing connection. The flora isn't a threat, it's the missing element. That was the moment when the conversation stopped being scientific. I proposed a simple solution. Controlled, limited, reversible. Contact with the flora. Not accidental, not through the atmosphere, but deliberate. Not for everyone at once, with gradual observation, with the option to stop. I didn't want to be the one who pushes an idea against a team. I wasn't a prophet. I disliked the role of someone who says, "You don't understand." That role is almost always false. Usually people understand enough. They simply make a different choice. But now I could see that their choice wasn't shaped by awareness, but by rhythm. The atmosphere seemed to remove the internal noise that allows a person to doubt. Doubt isn't weakness, it's the source of divergence. Without doubt, a human becomes a function. I looked at Kane and thought that, in his own way, he was happy. At last, the world matched his ideal. No scandals, no excess emotion, no "I feel," only procedure. And suddenly I understood. The atmosphere wasn't making them worse, it was making them convenient. Convenience is a dangerous form of good. It sells easily. It's easy to implement, easy to justify. No tragedies, no tears, just people who have stopped interfering with each other's existence. It could have been a utopia if utopias didn't have a cost. The cost is the absence of individual deviation, and therefore the absence of individual choice. I did what I didn't want to do. I offered them the flora. I spoke softly, carefully, breaking the process into steps, not because I doubted, but because I knew that if I spoke sharply, they would hear a threat. This isn't infection, it's an interface. It's what we're missing so the organism doesn't remain a closed circuit. They were silent, and I felt that their silence was already turning into refusal before anyone spoke. I looked at Laura. She was the only one who held on a little longer. There was still something human in her. Maybe because she had been the one to hold the sandwich for me, and therefore carried a hidden sense of responsibility. But responsibility is also a form of fear. I suddenly realized, if I push, I become the one they fear, the one who changes others. And if I retreat, I become complicit in how they lose themselves while calling it stability.
We don't know the consequences.
We know the consequences of refusal. You're already under its influence, just without an exit.
You can't decide for everyone.
I'm not deciding, I'm offering. Kane looked at the others, not for advice, for confirmation of synchrony. And I understood. They had already made their choice. They were ready to accept leveling, stability, predictability, but not change that couldn't be collectively controlled. The flora required individual interaction, choice, risk, and the system they had become didn't allow risk. Then I understood completely. The planet wasn't sterile because life here was poor, but because everything unnecessary was filtered out on its own. And the human, unwilling to step beyond their own completeness, becomes unnecessary here as well. I stopped trying to persuade them, because I understood forcing the flora would be violence, leaving them without it would be stagnation. That's when I saw a third path, harsh, cold, the only one that wouldn't turn me into an aggressor or them into carriers of a standard, breaking the chain. I exited under protocol, officially for additional sample collection. That raised no questions. I was still the mission biologist, and gathering specimens remained my direct responsibility. No one stopped a procedure that had always been my domain. The airlock sealed behind me with its familiar sound. The air outside was as even as ever. The planet didn't react to my presence. It never reacted abruptly. I opened the comm channel. I'm on the surface. We need to finish the conversation. The pause lasted slightly longer than usual. Then Kane responded.
Go ahead.
I moved slowly along the flora, pretending to log data. The motions were familiar. My hands knew what to do, even while my mind was occupied elsewhere. I understand now why you feel calm here, and why that calm frightens me.
You're interpreting again. We're only recording physiological normalization.
Exactly. Normalization is the problem. I stopped. The atmosphere of this planet isn't toxic. It has structure. It levels. It removes differences. It makes the system stable. You no longer conflict, doubt, or hesitate.
Is that bad?
It's the end of direction. You stabilize, but you stop developing. Silence filled the channel. The flora here isn't a life form in a conventional sense. It's an interface. It's not needed for survival. It's needed for interaction. Without it, the human organism remains a closed circuit. The atmosphere can only simplify us. The flora connects.
You're proposing intervention?
I'm proposing choice, which you no longer have.
I understood they wouldn't accept this, not because I was wrong, but because a collective leveled by the atmosphere is incapable of accepting individual change. You're all under its influence, uniformly. That makes you stable and immobile.
You're speaking like someone affected by the environment.
Yes, but I'm the only one interacting with it, not merely adapting. I paused. That's why I can't leave with you.
You can't decide for us.
I'm not deciding, I'm closing the chain. As I spoke, I activated the protocol, remotely, without an alarm, through biological clearance. In the case of a confirmed or suspected biological threat, the mission biologist had authority to initiate emergency evacuation without crew consent, a protocol designed for reports, rarely used. The parameters matched. The system accepted the command.
What did you do?
I'm sending you home. Kane understood first.
You're launching the module without yourself.
Yes,
You realize you won't be able to return.
I do.
Then why?
I looked at the plants that once seemed sterile. Because if you return like this, it will become the norm, not a catastrophe, a standard.
And you?
I'm already beyond the standard. The countdown began. I stood among the flora as the module prepared for launch. I felt no urgency, no regret, only precision.
This is a mistake.
No, it's containment, exactly as the protocol prescribes. The airlock sealed. The connection dropped. When the module departed, I was left alone. And only then, in that silence, did I remember the moment fully. Laura, her smile, the sandwich she held knowing I wouldn't take it myself, the sauce, the glove, the skin. It wasn't an accident, it was an entry point. Everything fell into place. The atmosphere prepared the organism. The flora completed the cycle. The team chose stability. I chose direction. The planet didn't keep me. It simply stopped requiring return. And I understood. The greatest threat to humanity isn't alien life, but life that offers to make us more than we're ready to accept.